Hey, speaking to you from the Eurodam, Holland, America. Cruise Seattle to Alaska, first full day today, and my solo cruise for riding and actually jump starting this thing that I've wanted to do forever. The ADHD thing, mental health, been percolating for a couple of years, but as I'm talking to my dad about this, he said, I'm so excited for you to go. You've been wanting to write since you were like 10, so that was an interesting perspective. So here I am and doing sort of a combo day 3 of mindfulness, not technically day 3, but third video, so that's what we'll call it. And you know, being on something like this has all kinds of interesting things to talk about, but so many things. One, going at all, and the privilege of it, which is great, but the sort of dissonance between, I don't know, it's so strange, maybe it's the ADHD masking or people pleasing, something I'm really curious to dive into more. Odd to feel so self-conscious when you talk to people about going. I talk to my certain kinds of friends and they're like, oh, that's great, and they're of course doing all kinds of crazy things, but it seems sort of not normal person-y, which is strange because you look around the boat and there's all kinds of normal people, and obviously it is a privilege, and I did a lot of bargain shopping and a lot of work to make it happen, and it's not like the people here who are spending crazy amounts of money, but still interesting. Anyway, that's a whole different topic. What I came on here now to talk about is on the mindfulness journey. I had dinner in the main dining room, and for those who've not been on this kind of thing, this is only my second. And of course, the last one, my father, bless his heart, was airlifted off the first day, so I was still here taking care of everybody because it turned out he was okay, and so I did not fly out when we hit land, but we made for a strange trip. And so this is my first, like, hopefully non-weird thing happening cruise, and for those who haven't done it, so this is only my second, and food is fabulous, there's all kinds of options, and one of the things is the dining room, and it's a sit down, and they have some lunches and dinners, and we discovered that the last time because my dad's friend Ruth, shout out to Ruth, being in her 80s and having issues, the dining room was sort of her big foray out of the room to really be able to sit out and enjoy, because the buffet and that kind of thing is just not in the cards for that. So it's really beautiful, it's, the meals are lovely, you can order whatever you want, I usually end up with a couple appetizers, over even a dinner, and you can usually get by a window, and it's pretty peaceable. It's, it's a dining room, there's a bunch of people, so there's busyness, but it's in the staff exceptional, right? So the reason I'm setting the scene is, here I am on my own, which fine. I've traveled a lot on my own, and even the last cruise, given, Ruth's limitations and some of the other stuff going on, there were a couple meals that I do on my own. Not so much the dining room, though, and in past life, so to speak, I've done a lot of that. I have never had a problem going to a restaurant and bringing a book and hanging out, watching everybody, and did that a lot, just to be around people when I lived on my own for a long time. But it's a little different, it's been a while between, having a lovely partner now coming up almost 4 years this year, and friends and this and that. And then not going out as much in general for all kinds of reasons. It's funny how it just became kind of an odd thing. Not bad, just interesting how unfamiliar it seemed after really that being a habit for like a couple of decades of my life. And the mindfulness thing, ADHD, I feel like there's all this backstory, and there is, but the relevant point being, I came armed with my book, and armed is an interesting term because I just read in one of my daily meditation, I have this book, it's like daily, I don't know, don't remember the name, but I just sort of randomly open it, and it's thoughts from this Buddhist monastery, these short little 1 to 3 page thoughts for the day. And today was about being armed, and the best I can capture the analogy, I didn't mean to talk about this, but was this person who'd gotten really close to gorillas, and people were really astounded at that, and he said, well, I didn't bring a gun, so then they would trust me. And the analogy the monk was using was to the guns that we bring are our defenses and our thoughts and our judgments and our expectations, and how if you come unarmed, what you're there to receive is going to be a lot more open to approaching you, and you to accepting it, because you're not putting something between you. So maybe, okay, so maybe that word worked. Came armed with my book. I mean, I love reading, and I don't kind of fall on and off the wagon lately, and so I got into this book earlier. Was really actually excited to sit down and read it. But the nature of the meal and the appetizers that I got really required 2 hands, knife and fork, and constant to eat, unless I was going to cut it all up, and then, which in the past I've done, cut everything up so I can sit and then read. And of course, that's a not mindful way to go about it, right? I mean, one of the common hints that you'll get, or advice, is to not do your meal watching TV, reading a book, whatever form of distraction, so that you can be present with a meal and be mindful of the cutting and the eating, the tasting, all that stuff. And it really wasn't what I wanted. I really wanted to read. But I also was looking at this lovely food, and maybe a little bit of respect, because the staff was so nice, and I felt it was very disconnected to sit there and read a book. And they were nice enough to put me by a window. And very stormy out, so the waves are pretty cool. I mean, very monotonous. We're out in the middle on a cruise day out in the ocean, so there's nothing specific to look at. But so it's monotonous and the sameness. But I had a choice, but I made a choice not to do whatever I needed to do to still read. And so it was really interesting to observe how that worked or not. Yes and no. And so that's what I wanted to pop on and talk about just a little bit, because that's such a common piece of advice, and smart. I mean, obviously, to stop while you eat and taste. And I mean, it's such a classic mindfulness technique. And I noticed with the ADHD brain, and now that I'm a little more open to sort of observing the intersection of how that fits with some of the common mindfulness advice, or the usual paths, it's challenging, because stopping can actually be really stressful because then you're stopping, and that brings to mind that so much of what we do is probably, that's what they say about ADHD, there's a fight, flight, freeze component to it, especially when it first starts, that there's things happening in your life, and then maybe those are triggers along the way. I don't know. That's where you retreat, is in your head. And as people started observing that, reflecting that back to me, and then I started learning more about the neuroscience of it, reading people like Dr. Gabor Mate, it sure seems to fit. And so it's our escape, is to get into our head, which is fine. It's okay. But being aware is, of course, the mindfulness part. And to me, this is where, at this intersection of practicing mindfulness, every once in a while I hit this spot where I really feel the tension between that and what I'm framing as the ADHD thing. And I don't think it's only ADHD people that experience this, but for sure with that kind of brain, it's a very common experience from my understanding. It's definitely mine, that when you stop, this wave of tension comes in. And it really hadn't dawned on me before why so many meditations, because I still do a lot of the guided meditation thing, because that helps me a lot to make it happen. They'll say, close your eyes, or if you're more comfortable, leave your eyes open with a soft gaze kind of thing. And I always thought that was an interesting phrasing, if you're not comfortable closing your eyes. And it finally, this light bulb went off, that maybe this is the same thing. You know, there's a safety thing with closing your eyes, where you're truly surrendering. That's its own old topic, because I've heard something interesting about open-eyed meditation the other day that was really fascinating. But I do think there's something, when you release or when you close your eyes, in some way, when you surrender, there's the possibility that something comes out. The cap you've been putting on something, you're lifting off or loosening a little bit. And what I sort of, it's kind of a duh, but the light bulb that went off for me tonight, that I came also to share, was, one, it's okay. I mean, this is a common experience, is, to not retreat from it. In the way that I've finally been able to work with that is another Buddhist principle. So putting the two together of acceptance and, of course, allowance. Acceptance is allowance, and letting the emotion be. That's where, said in another video, these videos are about mindfulness in the daily life. You're having dinner, how can I implement it? How can that be helpful? But the sitting meditation builds the muscle and the training for this. And I'm so grateful for the time I spent listening to those kind of meditations and listening to those kind of Dharma talks, talking to my neighbor, Nita, the Buddhist, about, and really wrangled with this in my head, because it's such an important concept about acceptance of what is, not as in the Buddhist version, which doesn't mean it's okay and you have your boundaries and this and that and the other, but embracing what is and allowance of it, and that includes your emotions. And contrary to many misconceptions, this goes to this again, meditation is not about shutting down your thoughts, or it's quite the opposite. It's more releasing them, and that means you're not trying to stop your brain, which is, by the way, impossible. Literally, it's biologically, neurologically wired to do what it does. What you're learning to do is let it flow and not get stuck and not get stopped, and to disassociate it from it a bit, but not to stop it. And the allowance is what lets things move through. And I have discovered that. I've talked about that in another video. It seems to me, now that I'm saying this, feels familiar. It can be a little overwhelming, but I think it's just, you get this initial torrent, but then if you go with it and observe it, however you manage to do that, whether you can just say that I'm going to let this happen, or for me, some of the fallbacks when it's really intense is, one of the super tricks that I found really useful is they get into your body, and so I'll go, gosh, how is this feeling? Is there tightness? Is there this? And you get really molecular about it, and tense right here, or this. Pulls you out of your head, grounds you, and it gives you the anchor to, go through this a little bit. And I say anchor, which is kind of an irony, because it's really not attaching to the shore and getting stuck that way. But anyway, between being tired and wine and port, there's a concept there that's its own whole complex philosophical discussion. But hopefully it's enough for you to get the gist of what I'm trying to say. And these are paradoxes that we're holding in the same space, and these concepts. And, for those of us not growing up in the Buddhist or Eastern philosophies, it's very different. But I'd encourage you, if you're going to try this advice out and you're sitting down to have your meal and to be thoughtful of every bite, you may get what I usually do, and definitely got tonight, which is this wave of nervousness or anxiety at the stopping, because it made me just go, and become an observer for a minute. Go, gosh, that's interesting. How's it making me feel? Like, literally think about how it's making you feel in your body. Is it making you tense? Is your heartbeat? And start paying attention, because that will bring you out of your head into your body, which is such a huge step to so many things. And it's okay if it's not perfect. It's the effort that matters. And every little experience you have like this layers on the next, and it does matter, and it does help. And you'll find as you come around the second time or the 10th or the 100th, it gets a little easier, or there's a little more ease to it, or quicker, or at least not as bad or frustrating or anxiety. So to the extent that helps anybody out there, have a wonderful, wonderful day wherever this finds you, and more later. See you then.